Theories of Creation, Talk 6. This talk is about the theory of 6 literal days of creation and the advantages and disadvantages of holding this view. So this theory keeps to a strictly literal understanding of Genesis 1 and 2. It's pointed out that there is a difference between the Hebrew words used for created, which is bara, made, which is asa, and formed, which is yatsa, and that only 3 things are referred to as created in Genesis 1. And they are firstly the creation of the basic elements of the physical cosmos, space, mass and time, as recorded in Genesis 1:1. And secondly, there's the creation of consciousness, that's nephesh, which is the soul, in Genesis 1 verse 21, where the word for creature in Hebrew is nephesh, and it's usually translated soul or life, and animals possess consciousness, whereas plants do not. And thirdly, the creation of man in the image of God, and that's recorded in Genesis 1 verse 27. And therefore, there are 3 basic created entities. The physical elements, of which all inorganic and unconscious organic systems are composed, such as plants. And then the consciousness, which the animal world possesses, and thirdly, the image of God, which humans possess. Genesis 1:1 refers to the initial creation of space, mass and time, the heavens, the earth and the beginning. And Genesis 1:2 describes earth as formless and empty. The rest of the chapter describes how the earth was subsequently formed and filled in 6 literal days, so that by the end of the week it was no longer formless and empty. Henry Morris, in his book Scientific Creationism, summarises the subsequent 6 days' events as shown on the information given below the screen. This shows day 1 to day 7 on the left, and what was formed or created on the right. And so on day 1 we have engergising of the physical elements of the cosmos, that is light, and that's paired with day 4, which is the formation of the astrophere, which is the sun, moon and stars. And then on day 2 we have the formation of the atmosphere and hydrosphere, that is the air and the water. And that's paired with day 5, which is the formation of life in the atmosphere and the hydrosphere, that is the birds and the sea creatures. And then on day 3 we have the formation of the lithosphere and the biosphere, that is the land and vegetation. And that's paired with day 6, which is the formation of life for the lithosphere and the biosphere, that is the animals and the human beings. And then on day 7 we've got rest from the completed work of creating and making. So there is a logic and a symmetry in this pattern, in that day 1 links with day 4, day 2 with day 5, and day 3 with day 6. Each day's creation events are taken completely literally, despite any clashes with modern scientific theories which might result, and it is then assumed that what must be wrong are the scientific theories, not their interpretation of the Bible. At the end of the creation week, Genesis 1 verse 31 tells us God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. If this statement is true, then this theory states it would be strange and grotesque if the sedimentary rocks under the feet of Adam and Eve were at the same time filled with the fossilized remains of billions of years of suffering and death, so that almost everywhere man would look on the earth he would encounter this vast graveyard. It could hardly look very good to men, so how could it be pronounced very good by God? In addition, as it's described as being very good, and it's presumed that this includes the heavens as well as the earth, it's also concluded that Satan's fall into sin must have occurred after this point in time. Genesis 2 verses 2 and 3 then tells us that God rested from all his work. And God blessed the 7th day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. The word for rested can also mean ceased, which does seem more likely, as God has no need to rest. So what are the advantages of this 6 literal days creation theory? Well, firstly, the creation account in Genesis can be taken at face value, and no special understanding of Hebrew words is necessary. And secondly, we don't need any explanations for the length of the days because they're accepted as being normal 24-hour periods. And thirdly, biblical chronology can be accepted as it stands. Adam and Eve can be accepted and understood to have been real historic people, the first of the human race, from whom all others are descended. The genealogies detailed in Genesis may be accepted as true and accurate and correctly traced back to Adam and Eve. And fourthly, in Genesis 1, verse 31, on the 6th day, when God saw everything that he had made was very good, there was no need to believe that the sedimentary rocks under the feet of Adam and Eve were at the same time filled with fossilized remains of billions of years of suffering and death. But what are the disadvantages of holding the 6 literal days theory? Well, firstly, no completely satisfactory explanation is given for the inclusion of the words, "and there was evening, and there was morning," the first day, at the end of each day's activities. This phrase seems to imply that God stopped creating at daily intervals, but there's no good reason given as to why. Secondly, no satisfactory explanation is given for God giving names to certain things before man was created. For example, God called the light day and the darkness night on day 1. He called the expanse sky on day 2, and so on. If man was not around until the 6th day, who was God speaking to? And then thirdly, if Eve was created within a few hours of Adam, then there's some difficulty in fitting the events of Genesis 2, verses 8 to 20 into this short time period. It's difficult to imagine Adam's state of mind if he was firstly created, then placed into the Garden of Eden, then given instructions about the tree of knowledge of good and evil, then he was shown all the animals and the birds, and he was asked to name them, and then he realised there was no suitable helper for him, and then he was put into a deep sleep, all within the space of a few hours. Presumably he would have been bewildered, to say the least. In answer to this, it's speculated that, as Adam was created perfect, and remained so until he sinned, his mental faculties and his speed of doing things would have been greatly enhanced, enabling him to accomplish all these things within a space of a few hours without any difficulty. In the next talk, we're going to look at scientific creationism and the young Earth theory, which usually goes hand in hand with accepting this 6 literal days of creation theory.